Ricky was very much like my father. Lucy was not like my mother. Lucy isn't like anybody. Lucy Ricardo really isn't like any living person. Come on, you know. She is that little part of all of us that is the troublemaker and, you know, the sprite, the handful, as we were saying. But I don't think there's really anybody who's exactly like that character. My mother was, as I said, very, very serious, really. Sometimes to a fault serious, and she had a rough life growing up. She went through a lot of pain as a kid. There was a lot of death in her family when she was young. Her father died when she was 4. Her grandmother and her aunt, who lived in the same house with her, both died while she was there. Her mother had to go off and work. You know, there was a lot going on, and she turned to this play acting, this as a relief, I would guess. She wanted to make other people laugh. And it was her opportunity to be a kid, because I don't think she ever got a chance to really be a child.
When I Love Lucy started out, the fact that your father was Cuban, was there bias about that? Was there...
Oh my God, yes, absolutely, especially with CBS. The networks, they were not going to let them do the show at all. They said, you know, who's going to believe that the all-American girl like you would be married to a Cuban? That's like saying to a black man, in the worst possible way of what they meant it in the 50s. Right. And my mother really was like, wow, really? Okay, but see, I am married to a Cuban. So they had to go out and do this whole vaudeville show to prove to CBS, to prove to the networks that people didn't think that at all. They thought they were great together. But yeah, there was an enormous, and when they went on TV, that was like, whoa, mixed marriage. Not to mention the fact that, you know, then she got pregnant. Oy. So it was firsts for everything. I have to clarify something. Yeah. On the archives forever and ever, you will now know this, I was never in I Love Lucy. There is a misinformation that got into a book somewhere that continued to get into the Wikipedias of the world, that even I believed that my brother and I were the children standing in the scene in the last I Love Lucy show where she is the statue. She becomes like this Revolutionary War statue person, and there's a scene where they pan the audience, and there's a bunch of kids standing in the front, and Desi and I are supposed to be in that shot. Well, they edited out that when they put it on television for years because they always make the shows shorter, you know. And so finally, TV Land put the shows on in their entirety a few years ago, and I couldn't wait to see this show so I could see that. And there's the scene, and there's Desi, and there's some other little girl who is definitely not me. So all these years they thought that was me because I was standing next to Desi, I guess. But I was never on the I Love Lucy show except in my mother's uterus when she was pregnant with me during the pilot. That I remember absolutely perfectly, as if it was yesterday. The only memory that I have of actually visiting the I Love Lucy set was when I was like 5 or 6, it was almost ending with the last few years. I remember being introduced in the audience, up in the bleachers, and I remember Desi taking a bow, perfect little gentleman's bow, you know, like little boys do. And then my father introduced me, and I wasn't there. They didn't know where I was because I was hiding under the bleachers. I was so ashamed and embarrassed that somebody was introducing me for apparently no reason. And then I remember the Lucy Goes to Scotland show, which I think was also an hour show. Because I remember the two-headed dragon, Fred and Ethel dressed as the two-headed dragon, and I remember memorizing almost that entire show. As a matter of fact, my mother has a tape, reel-to-reel tape recorder, sitting down with us, probably 1958 or something like that, 57, 58, in Palm Springs, where she said, "What's your favorite I Love Lucy show?" Can you imagine, even at that age, my own mother was asking what my favorite episode was. No wonder. We Desi and I both said that goes to Scotland, Lucy Goes to Scotland. And then we proceeded, I have this tape, so I know this, we proceeded to just recite the entire show, plus the song, "I'm in love with the dragon's dinner, and the dragon's a drag on me," whatever that was. Desi remembers that to this day. So I must have seen that show, I must have been there when they rehearsed some of that, but I don't have many memories of being on the set for I Love Lucy because I was too small when I was home. My mom and my dad had the same bunch of people working with them for decades. I say decades because even though their show only lasted 8 years, My father was still around the studio for many years, and then there was the Lucie show, and then our Here's Lucie show, and it was practically the same crew through all those years. You know, the Maury Thompsons and the Tommy Tuckers and Renita Riachi, who did the wardrobe, and Hal King, who did the makeup, and Irma Kuzli, who did the hair, and Jack Donahue, who directed many of the shows, or Mark Daniels directed them. They were very loyal. The crew was loyal to them, and she and he were very loyal to those people. And they treated us like family, always. Keith Thibodeau was the kids, as Desi was not Little Ricky, and many people think to this day that he was. But of course he couldn't have been, because when Desi was born, she had the baby in 1953, January 19th, and the same night she was actually having a cesarean at Cedars of Lebanon and had my brother. But if you know, 2 years later, there was a 5-year-old kid on the show. Everybody goes, "Wasn't that your brother?" And I said, "No." So it was Keith Thibodeau, and he was about 3 or 4 years older than Desi, I guess. And for a long time, I thought Keith was related to us because he went everywhere with us. He was Desi's best friend. Because of Keith, Desi learned to play the drums, and he was a terrific kid, still is. And my mother kind of adopted him in a way, and he would go with us on weekends and come down to my father's ranch with us. And Keith is in all of our home movies and all of our photographs of growing up. I wish I could say I got a chance to know Bill Frawley, but I never really did. I only from watching him on the show, like everybody else. Whenever I was around, I think I met him once or twice, and he was a nice guy, But he liked to disappear and just go watch the fights. I never knew where he disappeared to. I found out years later that that's what he would, he just did his shtick and went back to the dressing room. Vivian was like family. Vivian lived with us on and off for years, was like Aunt Viv to me, read to me when I was a baby, gave me great advice when I was growing up, getting into the theater. I really adored her. We remember the show for its laughs, but oddly enough, because people talk about this all the time and ask me, why do you think, all these years. I think it's the unconditional love part that really hits home, and we all want to be able to get into that much trouble and come out okay.